What is going on, YouTube? So this is a follow-up to my big brake kit for under $300 for my S197, and in my last video I gave you guys a parts guide of what you need to make the conversion work, and unfortunately I have to retract a part from that parts list because the parts are not compatible. The Boss 302 brake lines will not work with these calipers. So I wanted a direct plug-and-play setup with no modifications made necessary. So basically, with the Boss 302 brake lines, this banjo bolt housing right here, this little block, the camera will focus, is enlarged on the Boss 302 brake lines, and it interferes with this lip on the caliper. As you can see, this brake line is going to line up perfectly, and it's going to recess right inside the lip. So you could make the Boss 302 brake lines work, but you would either have to grind down this flange or shave down the banjo bolt fitting block. So I didn't want to do any of that, so I just went ahead and sent the Boss 302 brake lines back to American Muscle, which their customer service is great. They took them back, no issues. And then I was searching around on the internet, and it seems like there's a back order on just about every brand of stainless steel brake lines. And luckily LMR has these J&M products stainless steel brake lines, and these are actually for the 6-piston Brembo conversion. And as you can see, they work with the 4-piston S550 GT calipers. So these are a little bit on the pricier side. I think I gave $130, which puts me right underneath $300. The Boss 302 brake lines came with the front and rear brake lines for $97, so I was under $100 with both front and back brake lines. So no big deal. I actually like these a lot. They're a direct copy of the OEM brake lines as far as the brackets and everything go, and they give you your clips for the wheel speed sensor wiring, so all that can clip in together. One thing I did not like is they did not include banjo bolts, so you have to reuse yours, but they do give you new copper O-rings, so that's a plus. Anyways, I did not want to go with the StopTech brake lines because I've heard way too many things of the banjo bolts actually snapping, so I guess you could go with them. And matter of fact, with the StopTechs, the banjo bolt fittings are rounded, so they're universal with pretty much any brake caliper. They will work on these, the Brembos, factory. But what I don't like about the StopTechs is that they really seem like a universal brake line. They don't have the mounting brackets on them. Like if you see people install those, they zip tie everything together, and I want to avoid that look. I want to try to keep it OEM looking, and these do a really great job of giving you that look, but you get the added benefit of the stainless steel line. So with all that being said, these are in stock. You can actually get a hold of these right now. This whole kit, like I said, you can source these calipers for under $200 on eBay. These are Boss 302 14-inch rotors that you can get off Rock Auto. These are blanks, they're not drilled or slotted, nothing fancy. But when I got these, they were on a wholesale closeout for $23.99, so I have under $50 in the rotors. I think even right now that deal is over with, but I think they're still under $50 per rotor. So you're looking at under $100 for rotors, under $200 for the calipers. And if you get lucky, you can get them preloaded with brake pads like I did, which they need to be removed before you install everything, but we'll get to that whenever I'm putting everything back together. And you will need to go to Lowe's and source these washers. These are half-inch washers, and what they do is they go in place between the caliper and the spindle because it gives you the proper spacing that you need to work with your 14-inch rotors. So you need 4 of those, 2 for each caliper. And then the tools necessary to do the job have these pliers. It makes it easier to remove the rubber caps that are covering up the bleeder valves, and a hammer, and you can use a punch or a really thin screwdriver. That way you can actually beat the pins out, the retaining pins for the brake pads. As you can see, these go right through. You just need something to punch those out. So I have the hammer and the screwdriver here. On the electric ratchet, we have a 15. That's for your mounting brackets for the calipers. This 10 is actually for the brake line mounts that go through right here. And then we have a 13, an 11, and an 8. So that's our bleeder valve wrench right there. 11 is to break the hard line off the OEM soft lines, and the 13 is for the banjo bolts. These are the S550 Ford Piston banjo bolts, and they're a 13. The Brembos, I'm not sure what size they are, but I'd imagine they're also a 13 millimeter. So that's the tools necessary to get these on. Of course, we're gonna need a jack stands, and I'm using an impact to get the wheels off. So that's everything right there. I'm using a .4 brake fluid. I have plenty of it. This is my bleeder bottle right here. It's just home brewed. It works. You guys can make one out of a drink bottle, or you can use something professional like a Mighty Vec, which definitely recommend one of those. Mine broke, so that's the next option. So there's all the tools, and here are the parts you need to make this conversion. And when I bought these calipers off Marketplace, the previous owner gave me these dust shields. I'm not reusing those. Matter of fact, I actually want to vent the rotors a little bit more. These actually kind of retain heat. They do keep the dust down. So I'm thinking about getting some wire snips, or tin snips I should say, and cutting the existing dust shields on my car. Because if you look at the 4-piston Brembos on a Boss 302 or GT500, the dust shields are really small. They're about this long, and all they really do is protect the tie rod ends. So they just kind of focus more on getting that proper ventilation through the rotor, which is what I'm going to try to go for. But until I get those tin snips, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to reuse the factory dust shields on my car. So without further ado, let's jack the car up. So the other side of the car is already jacked up and supported. So now we're going to do the driver's side. Once we get it jacked up in there, we can go ahead and take the wheels off. So here we are on the passenger side of the car. I went ahead and disconnected the wheel speed sensor harness from the OEM rubber line off these plastic retaining clips. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and loosen up this 13 millimeter. Since it's already still bolted down to the car, we can use that leverage and rake this loose just enough. That way it doesn't leak fluid, and we can go ahead and get this 10 millimeter completely removed. So for that, I'm going to use my electric ratchet. Go ahead and zip this line off. And we have another 10 millimeter bracket right here behind the strut. There it is. You guys can see it right there. That's your second 10. And what we're going to do now is go ahead and remove the 15 millimeter bolts that are holding in the caliper to the spindle. So the caliper is actually resting on the rotor, which is perfect, because that way it doesn't put strain on anything. So now we can go ahead and take our 13 millimeter and we can go ahead and completely disconnect the soft line from the hard line. So as you can see, we have the soft line disconnected from the hard line. I have it vacuum capped off, and I have 2 rags on both ends of the brake lines. That way we don't lose any brake fluid and make a mess everywhere. Okay, so the brake pads are actually seated into the rotor, so we're just going to take this dead blow and just beat the caliper off the rotor. And now we can go ahead and take it off completely and snake the brake line around. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and lay this in the box of trash because it's still going to have residual brake fluid leaking out from it. So now everything is out of the way and free. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this flashlight around. And now we're going to take our dead blow and smack this rotor until it pops free, just like that. We'll rock it off. And now we have the old rotor removed. And we can go ahead and unbag our 14-inch rotor and go ahead and get it set into place. So here's the new 14-inch rotor. Let's try to get this thing into place. There we go. Looks really good. Now we can go ahead and get our caliper and get it mounted up on the spindle. So the best way I have found in doing this is just to get the caliper kind of lined up onto the rotor. And then get one bolt started. So I'm going to try to get the top one started. A couple of threads just to hold the caliper in place. Because remember, we have to put this washer in between the spindle and the caliper. So I just like using the top bolt to hold everything in place. That way you can go ahead and line up this washer in between the caliper and spindle and then put the bolt through. And make sure you have enough threads to hold this caliper up, because it would hurt if this thing was to fall down and hit you in the head. So I'm gonna put the washer in between the caliper and the spindle. Now the bolt is through the washer, and I'm getting it threaded onto the caliper. And I'm not going to go ahead and tighten this all the way down because we still need to take the top bolt out and put the washer in place on it. So I have the upper 15mm bolt backed off. So here's our washer. I'm going to put it in between the spindle and get the bolt pushed through. And now you can go ahead and torque up those two 15mm bolts. So with those two 15mm bolts torqued down, we go ahead and start routing up our stainless steel brake line. So remember to use the brand new copper washers that they give you guys, and you're just going to have one on one end of the brake line block and then another on the other side that goes between the brake line and the caliper. So I went ahead and got the brake line started. As you can see, I have the banjo bolt on and torqued down, and the line is going to run upright just like that. It's going to make that kind of J shape. It's going to go straight up, and then your mounting bracket for the brake line is actually going to be on the outside of the strut hole. That way it threads in and holds into place. And then with it lined up like that, you can see our bracket is just going to work out perfectly. It's going to go sit right into factory position. So as you can see, everything's torqued down. So what I did, I tightened this down as much as I could, And then I put this 10 in the bracket. That way, once I torque that down, I had all the leverage I needed to go ahead and just completely tighten off that 13mm nut. So we're just gonna go ahead and wipe off some residual brake fluid, so that way once we bleed, we can check for leaks, and hopefully we don't have any. So what we're gonna do now is just grab our brand new plastic connectors, get them started on this wiring harness, and clip them into the brand new stainless steel brake lines. Now with that in place, that looks great. Looks like factory. That's the way they should have came, honestly, from the factory. So now we can go ahead and load up our brake pads, and once we get that situated, we can go ahead and bleed the brakes. So the way I'm going to load these pads is with the wear indicator on the back side of the rotor, because I don't want it scarring up the front side, even though you should never let your brake pads get that low anyway. You need to visually inspect them. But this is how I'm going to push mine in. So what you want to try to do is when you're pushing these in is line up these square holes with your pin holes. So we're going to go ahead and try to do that. It just requires you getting it in the right angle. You have to fight with the rotor a little bit, and it depends. Like these were used calipers, so the pistons may be extended a little bit. So I pushed that one in a little bit too much, so I'm going to work it out. That way it looks like those squares are lined up with their pinholes. So now we can go ahead and get our other side started. Just like so. And we're going to grab our retaining pins and our backing spring. Just go ahead and make sure your pins go all the way through your pads and caliper, because that way it will streamline the process and you don't have to fight with it while you're trying to install the backing spring. So the best way to do it, just get your top one started. And you want it to start underneath that hook. Get this pin pushed through. So go ahead and push the pin all the way through and just hammer it on. And guess what? We're done. So now we just need to bleed our calipers. Gotta top off the reservoir first, because I know we've lost some, especially when we broke those lines free. So the driver's side is interesting just because it involves one more step versus the passenger side, and that's just you need a flathead screwdriver to reach in here and pop these plastic little push tabs that are in here, so you can actually just push that one out a little bit on this side and pull it out. And this one right here has a little tab in it. You can just shove your flathead in there on the base. So with this push tab pushed out and this one removed, you can actually push this panel down and get access to your 10mm mounting bracket bolt. So now with everything exposed, we can go ahead and disconnect this wheel speed sensor wire from the brake line, which just involves raising up little plastic clips and squeezing the wire out, just like so. This line is completely free from the brake line, and we can actually take this brake line off and use it as a template so we know where to put our brand new clips. So what I'm going to do is just slowly break everything loose. I'm not going to disconnect anything yet. I'm going to slightly break this free, that way it's loose but not leaking fluid, and then I'm going to leave this 10mm bolted into the bracket, that way I can put leverage on this, and once that's broke free we can actually go ahead and take that out. and then we can go ahead and start loosening up the caliper. And I'm going to leave this brake line connected to the caliper, so the only line that needs to be disconnected is right here. That way once this caliper comes off, it's going to come out complete with the line and everything. Okay, so I was mistaken earlier in the beginning of the video, which I'm going to edit it, is this brake line up here is actually a 13, not an 11. So like I said, I'm just going to break that just real gently so it's broke free, but not going to leak any brake fluid. And then I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this bracket. You have another middle bracket, which is also a 10mm, right here behind your strut. So we're just going to hook up the electric ratchet and break that free. Okay, and now we're going to completely take out the 15mm holding the caliper in. So I'm going to go ahead and swap sockets. You may need to take a dead blow to the caliper if it's going to stick like this one's wanting to. I'm going to go ahead and completely get this line fully disconnected. So we could probably do it by hand now. So I have a vacuum cap I'm going to try to put over top of this brake line. And then have a larger white one that I want to put over top of it. And then put this rag around. And now we have our 2-piston factory caliper. So before we can get started putting the caliper on, we need to get the old rotor off. And usually these are pretty seized up, so you may need a dead blow to help beat them free. So this one actually kind of came right off. Most of the time you really have to fight with these. So now with this rotor off, we can go ahead and put our brand new 14-inch rotors in place. So as you can see here, I have the OEM caliper and rubber brake hose laid out here, and I'm using it as a template so I know where to put these harness retaining clips on. So they're kind of mocked in here just for now. And your brake lines have stamped brackets. So we have an L here for the driver's side, left-hand side of the vehicle. So we know that's for the driver's side caliper. And just for reference, your calipers are going to be stamped too. So this is the right-hand side, this is for the passenger side. So we're going to grab this driver's side caliper, and we're going to go ahead and bolt up the brake line to it and go ahead and get it mocked up on the car. So the banjo bolt is a 13mm, and we have it torqued down using that ratchet there. And now this will give you guys a bigger overall picture of the size comparison of both of these calipers. So you guys can see we were making a massive upgrade even with the base S550 GT brakes. So now we're going to slide on the new 14-inch rotor. Just like so. Now we can go ahead and get our caliper and get it mocked into place. Now one thing I will say that is tricky is trying to get the new caliper on, because remember we have to use a washer as a spacer. So what I like to do to make things a little bit easier on us is to just go ahead and get the caliper on with just one of the 15mm bolts. So whichever one's easiest for you, I like doing the top one. Let's go ahead and get it started and thread it in just a little bit to hold the caliper right where you want it. And one other thing you might need to do, because I had to do it, is clean off the old existing blue Loctite from the factory bolts, because they do make it a little bit harder for the bolt to get started into the new caliper, especially if you've painted one like I did. So I also had to fight with Loctite and overspray that was inside the threads of the caliper. So I just chased the bolt through the threads and clean it up. That way it's easier to finger tighten everything. So now that we have the top bolt started, just a couple threads, we can go ahead, get our washer. And this is the really tricky part, is getting this washer in between the caliper and the spindle. So we're gonna go ahead and do that now. I'm pushing the caliper out, pushing the washer in, and now I'm starting this bolt through the washer. And now I'm getting it started into the caliper. So now that I have that bottom one started with the washer, I'm going to try to take the phone off the tripod and show you guys exactly what to do with your washer with this top bolt. Now, as you can see, I have the top bolt loosened up, and what we are going to do is get this washer started in between the caliper and the spindle. So I'm gonna see if I can get this bolt kind of pushed through a little bit and record it at the same time for you guys. So the washer is where it needs to be, so I'm gonna back this bolt out just a little bit, push this caliper back in just like so. Now everything is in place, and we can go ahead and torque these 15 millimeters down. So now what we can do is quickly pull these rubber caps off and get this hard line started in our new stainless steel brake line. That way we don't lose any more brake fluid. So try to get this as tight as you possibly can by hand. You're gonna have that little metal tab that shoves through the existing squared off hole. Put my 10mm socket on it. Go ahead and tighten it up. Nice and tight. So now we can grab our 13mm. Nice and snug. Let's clean up all this brake fluid, so that way we can see if it's gonna leak. Because if you have a leak of fluid, that means air is getting inside, which means air in the brake lines, which means no brakes. No bueno. We can go ahead and get this bracket lined up. Get our 10mm started on the middle bracket. There we go. New plastic clips. Get those started on the wiring harness for the wheel speed sensor. Snaps into place just like that. It's easier just to go ahead and get it started on the wiring harness than it is the actual brake line itself. So there we go. Brake line is installed. So now we can just go ahead and load up our brake pads. So the way I'm going to install my brake pads are with the pad that has the squiller. This pad, I'm not sure exactly where the viewfinder is at, but this is your squiller right here. And I want these to be on the back side of my rotor, so that way it doesn't scratch up the face of the rotor when you install them on the front side. So what we're going to do is just slide our pads in, just like so. So I did end up pushing the pad too far back, so I'm just gonna find my flathead and kind of gently push the pad back out. You want the nice pretty beveled end to be on the outside. It just looks a lot better. So now we can get our spring started. So an easy way to get these backing springs on, just go ahead and get the top one started. And once you get it started, you can actually just take a hammer and smack it right on, and it pops it over the retaining pins. So that's how you load the pads. Super simple. Okay, so now we're getting to the process of bleeding the brakes, and as you can see, I have a big gallon of .4 brake fluid here, and I have a smaller bottle that I want to use as the bleeder bottle. And the way I'm going to bleed the brakes is just the traditional way. I'm going to start from the brake caliper that's the furthest away from the master cylinder, which would be your passenger rear. So I'm going to start there, and then the driver's side, rear, and then passenger front, and then finish it off with the driver front. And with these 4 piston calipers, you're going to have 2 bleeder valves, one on the inside and outside. And to bleed these, you need to start with the inside one first, and then once you finish it up, do the outside one. So just to keep this video a little bit shorter, I'm just going to show you guys the process of bleeding the rear caliper, and then you're just going to repeat that process like I said with the rear driver, and then front passenger, finish off with the driver's side front. So I have my bleeder bottle in place on the nipple, and I'm going to have my helper pump the brake 3 soft times. Go ahead. And now hold that 4th one. I want to crack this open. And we're going to watch for air bubbles. So it looks like this side is good. No air bubbles, straight fluid. So close this valve off. And then make sure to top off your master cylinder, because once it goes low, you're going to suck air into the entire system, which means you have to bleed everything and bleed the ABS pump. So top off the fluid and just repeat the process with all the other calipers in the pattern I mentioned earlier, and eventually you're going to push out some small air bubbles, and then your brake system will be fully bled. And there you have it. That is the full installation of the S550 calipers onto a S197 Mustang GT. Thanks for watching.